Welcome to Life Stories, where we dive into the real, raw, and unforgettable journeys that shape us. Today, we share the story of Emily, a young woman who faced heartbreak, rejection, and the weight of an unexpected pregnancy, all while trying to find her place in the world. Through her struggles and triumphs, she learns valuable lessons about love, forgiveness, and the strength to rebuild. Stay with us as we explore her story of resilience and hope. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to start today's story. It was in the early days of high school that I first met Jack. I was just another shy, quiet girl, the kind who sat at the back of the class and tried not to draw attention to myself. But Jack, he was different. He had that easy charm about him. His smile could light up any room, and his laughter was infectious. He wasn't the class clown, but there was something about the way he carried himself that made everyone gravitate toward him. And I couldn't help it, I found myself drawn to him too. It wasn't just his looks or his popularity that captivated me, it was something deeper. When he spoke to me, it was as if he saw me for who I really was, not just the girl who kept to herself. He'd ask questions, not the usual small talk you get from acquaintances, but ones that made me feel like he was genuinely interested in me. My dreams, my fears, my thoughts. I realized that Jack, in his own way, understood me better than anyone else ever had. And for a 16-year-old girl, that was everything. For once, I didn't feel invisible. Our relationship didn't start like some whirlwind romance. No, it grew slowly. We spent hours after school, talking about our future, about the things we would do, the places we would go. Jack had this incredible energy, this excitement about life that was contagious. He had dreams, big ones, and he always made it clear that I was a part of them. He talked about opening a business together, living in a small, cramped apartment in some big city, maybe New York, maybe Chicago. It didn't matter where, as long as we were together. To me, it was more than just the dreams we talked about. It was the feeling of possibility, the feeling that together we could take on the world. I believed in him, I believed in us. Jack wasn't just a boyfriend to me, he was my partner, my best friend, the person I thought I would share everything with. I imagined our future, a life built side by side, unstoppable. I thought we were invincible, that nothing could tear us apart. And for a while, it felt that way. We were the perfect couple, or so I thought. But after graduation, things started to change. It was subtle at first, like the tide pulling away from the shore. Jack, who had once been so eager to talk about our future, began to pull back. At first, it was just a few missed texts here and there, a few hours where he didn't respond. But then, it stretched into days, and our walks in the park, once filled with long, meaningful conversations, became rare. When we did meet up, he would steer the conversation back to his future, his college entrance exams, his plans to attend a top-tier university like Georgetown or Stanford. It wasn't just that he was focused on his future, I understood that. I was too, but it felt like he was leaving me behind. I could feel it in the way he spoke, the way his gaze grew distant when he talked about his dreams. It was as if the life we had imagined together wasn't even part of the equation anymore. I couldn't understand it. How could the person who once told me we'd do everything together, build a future together, suddenly be so detached? Then one afternoon in October, a crisp fall day when the leaves had turned gold and red, he stopped me in the park. We were walking down the gravel path, the old oak trees casting long shadows over us. Jack paused mid-step, his hands shoved deep in his jacket pockets, his eyes fixed on the ground. I felt the knot form in my stomach, the dread creeping in. "Emily, we need to talk," he said, his voice clipped. I brushed a strand of dark hair from my eyes, trying to steady my breathing. Something was wrong. I could feel it. "Is something wrong?" I asked, my voice trembling despite my best efforts to remain calm. Jack kicked at a pebble, eyes still on the ground. "It's just, our relationship doesn't fit anymore," he said, his tone almost cold. "I've got big plans. I'm applying to schools, chasing a career, and this," he waved a hand between us, not even looking at me, "it's holding me back." My heart skipped a beat. "Holding you back?" I echoed, my voice shaking. "I thought we were in this together. You said we'd figure it out, college, life, everything." Jack finally looked up at me, his hazel eyes distant, resolute. "I know what I said, Emily," he said, "but I've made up my mind. It's better this way, for both of us." And just like that, He turned and walked away. My feet felt glued to the ground, as though the earth itself had swallowed me whole. I stood there, rooted to the spot, my chest aching, my heart breaking with every step he took away from me. He didn't glance back. Not once. The autumn wind picked up, tugging at my scarf, but I barely felt it. The world seemed to move in slow motion. I could hear the crunch of the leaves beneath my feet as I stood there, numb. I couldn't understand how he could throw everything we'd shared away so easily, as if it were nothing more than extra baggage. For days, I stayed in that empty space, unable to comprehend what had happened. The person I thought I'd spend my life with, the person who had once seemed like my soulmate, had just walked away without a second thought. And as the days turned into weeks, I realized that this was only the beginning of my struggles. What came next would shake my world to its core. After Jack walked away, I tried to piece my life together. It felt like everything was unraveling. His words echoed in my mind, "This is holding me back." He had left me with nothing but the memory of all the dreams we'd shared and a growing emptiness that I couldn't fill. It wasn't just the loss of him, but the loss of the future I had imagined, the future that now seemed impossible. In the weeks that followed, I tried to stay busy, to keep my mind occupied, but it was hard. My body, for reasons I couldn't ignore, began to feel different. I'd wake up with a sense of nausea that wouldn't go away, and smells that once seemed ordinary suddenly made my stomach churn. I told myself it was just stress, that I was just dealing with the breakup in my own way. But then came the missed period. A tight knot formed in my chest, and the fear crept in. I couldn't shake the thought that something was wrong. I went to the corner drugstore, nervously pacing the aisles before grabbing a pregnancy test, trying to pretend it wasn't the only thing on my mind. I locked myself in the bathroom when I got home, the silence in the house almost suffocating. My heart pounded as I waited, the minutes stretching like hours. And then the test showed 2 pink lines. The world stopped. I sat there for a long time, staring at the test in my hands, the truth staring back at me, mocking me with its clarity. I was pregnant. The thoughts swirled in my mind like a storm, but I couldn't bring myself to cry. Not yet. I stuffed the test into my pocket and wiped my face, trying to push the fear aside. Dinner was ready, my mom's familiar voice calling from the kitchen. My stomach turned at the thought of facing them, my parents, who had no idea what was happening, who had no idea what I was carrying. But I knew I couldn't avoid it forever. The silence between us was thick as I walked into the dining room. The smell of meatloaf and gravy filled the air, the kind of comfort food we'd eaten 100 times. But tonight, it felt like an unbearable weight. My father sat at the head of the table, his glasses perched on the end of his nose, as he skimmed through the local newspaper. My mom, as usual, was bustling around, balancing a casserole dish in one hand and a bowl of mashed potatoes in the other. "Mom, Dad," I began, my voice shaky, barely a whisper. "I need to talk to you." They both looked up at me, the newspaper rustling as my father folded it and looked at me over his glasses. "What is it, Emily? You look like you've seen a ghost." My mother froze, her eyes darting over to me, her smile slipping from her face. "Emily, what's wrong?" she asked, her voice suddenly tight, full of concern. I could feel my chest tighten. My breath hitched in my throat. It was time to say it. "I am pregnant," I choked out, the words shattering the silence in the room like glass. For a moment, there was nothing but stillness. Then, it crashed down on me, my mother's gasp, her hand flying to her throat, her face going pale. My father's face turned from pink to a deep red, veins bulging in his neck. The newspaper slammed onto the table, and my mom dropped the spoon she'd been holding, gravy splatting across the tablecloth. "Pregnant?" my mother whispered, almost choking on the word. You're what?" Her voice rose higher, almost hysterical. "How could you be so reckless, Emily? What will everyone think? What are we going to tell people?" "Hold on, Ellen," my father cut in, his voice dangerously low. "Let's just calm down." I could feel their anger, their disappointment, their confusion, and it was suffocating. My mother's eyes were wide with fear, her hands trembling as she twisted her apron in knots. My father stood up suddenly, his chair scraping harshly against the floor, and his voice broke through the tension like a hammer. "You're telling me you've ruined your life, and ours too? Who's the father?" "That Jack kid." I flinched at the mention of Jack's name. It's complicated, I whispered. He's gone. The words hung in the air, heavy and unfinished. Gone, my father scoffed, his face a mixture of disbelief and anger. And now you think you can handle this on your own? You're 17, Emily. You think you can raise a baby? What about your future? What about your education? This is a disgrace. I didn't want this, I said, my voice cracking. But I'm not running away from it. I'll figure it out. My father's laugh was bitter. Handle it? You've got no idea what you've done, Emily. You're not raising a kid under my roof. You've made your bed. Now lie in it. Tears spilled from my eyes as the weight of his words pressed down on me. You're kicking me out, I whispered, my voice breaking. Just like that? Yes, he snapped, turning away from me. Get out. His words felt like a slap in the face. My mother's sobs echoed in the background as I stood there, unable to move. She had no words, no comfort to offer, only my father's harsh, unforgiving anger. I stumbled back to my room, my body trembling as I packed a duffel bag, stuffing it with whatever clothes I could grab. The weight of their rejection felt like a stone, pressing down on me, suffocating me. The world outside my window seemed to fade as I shoved the photo of me and Jack into the side pocket of the bag, the memories of what could have been haunting me. As I stepped into the cold night, the door slamming behind me, I realized that this was just the beginning of a journey I never imagined for myself. I had nowhere to go, no home, no plan, but one thought kept me going: my grandmother Margaret. She'd never turn me away. I had to reach her. She was my only hope. The night air was sharp against my skin as I walked away from the only home I had ever known. The door slammed behind me with finality, the sound echoing in the quiet street. My father's words, "Get out," rang in my ears, searing into me with their cruelty. I had left, yes, but there was no sense of freedom in that. There was no relief, only a raw, aching void where my family had once been. I walked through the streets, the weight of my duffel bag pulling me down as if trying to drag me back. The cold beat at my cheeks, but I barely noticed it. The thought of what awaited me, of the uncertainty ahead, was far more overwhelming. I had to keep moving. My destination was clear: Grandma Margaret. Her little house in Riverton was 2 hours away, but it might as well have been a lifetime. The bus ride there was a blur, lights flashing past the window, the hum of the engine drowning out my thoughts. Every mile felt like a step further from the life I had known, from everything that had once been safe. But I had no other choice. My parents had turned their backs on me, and Jack was gone. I had to go somewhere, anywhere, where I could start over. When I arrived, the familiar sight of Grandma's house was both a comfort and a reminder of how far I had fallen. The small brick house had always felt like a sanctuary. Its sagging porch, the garden full of flowers even in winter, the soft scent of chamomile that always seemed to linger in the air. It was the one place I could always count on. I knocked on the door, heart racing. It opened almost immediately. There stood Grandma Margaret, wrapped in her faded quilted robe, her silver hair pulled into a messy bun. She took one look at me, her sharp grey eyes scanning my face, and without a word, she pulled me into her arms. I collapsed against her, feeling the warmth of her embrace seep into my cold, aching bones. "Come on in, dear," she said softly, her voice gravelly but gentle. "You're always welcome here." Her words were a balm to my shattered heart. I had no idea how to explain everything, how to put into words what had just happened, but I didn't have to. Grandma knew. She had seen enough of life's ups and downs to understand that sometimes all you needed was a little time to heal. In the weeks that followed, I settled into a new routine with Grandma. The quiet rhythm of life in Riverton was different from the chaos I had left behind, and at first, I couldn't quite adjust. But gradually, as I helped Grandma with her garden and sat with her in the evenings, sipping tea, I found a kind of peace. I started to breathe again. The knot in my stomach loosened, though it would never quite disappear, and slowly, the reality of my pregnancy began to set in. There were days when I would find myself staring at my reflection, wondering what kind of mother I would be. Would I be strong enough? Would I be enough? Grandma never pressured me to talk. She didn't ask about Jack or my parents. She simply let me be, offering quiet words of wisdom when needed. And as the weeks passed, I began to see a future again. Not the one I had imagined with Jack, but a new one. One where I would have to take control of my life. for myself and for the little one growing inside me. Then one afternoon, a week before Christmas, I sat on the old plaid couch in Grandma's living room, my hand resting on my stomach. I felt a small flutter, a little kick, and I smiled. It was the first real sign that things were going to be okay, that despite everything, I wasn't alone. There was a life inside me, and that life was depending on me. Grandma came in with a tray of cookies and sat beside me, watching me for a moment before speaking. "You're doing fine, Emily. You're stronger than you think." I smiled at her, the first real smile I had felt in months. She was right. I was stronger, and I was going to be okay. For the first time, I truly believed it. It had been months since I left home, months since my parents had turned their backs on me. Time had a way of dulling the sharp edges of pain, but it never fully disappeared. In the quiet of Grandma Margaret's house, I slowly began to rebuild myself, but there were moments late at night or in the quiet of the garden when the reality of my estrangement from my parents would catch up to me. I couldn't shake the thought that maybe they were right. Maybe I was a disgrace. Maybe I had ruined everything. Then one afternoon, as the sun dipped below the horizon, a letter arrived. It wasn't anything spectacular, just an envelope with my name scrawled on the front in my father's familiar handwriting. I stared at it for a long time, heart pounding. I hadn't heard from them in months, not a phone call, not even a letter. And now, here it was. My parents had written to me. I opened the envelope with shaking hands, my breath caught in my throat as I read the words. They were sorry. They had made a mistake. They wanted to make things right. My father had admitted his wrongs, acknowledged how he had let his fear and anger cloud his judgment. My mother, too, was sorry. She had been overwhelmed and confused, but she wanted to try again. They wanted to meet me, to talk, to see how I was doing. At first, I didn't know what to think. Part of me wanted to rip up the letter and never think about them again. Part of me wanted to scream at them for abandoning me when I needed them most. But there was another part, a quieter, softer part, that wondered if maybe, just maybe, they had changed. I didn't respond right away. I needed time to think. The wounds were still fresh, the scars too deep. But as the days passed, I found myself replaying the letter over and over again, reading between the lines. My father had said that he missed me, that he regretted what had happened, and my mother, though her words were more frail, had echoed the same sentiment. They were asking for forgiveness. They were asking for a second chance. I decided I needed to see them, not for their sake, but for mine. I had to know if I could move forward with them in my life, or if I would always carry the weight of their rejection with me. We agreed to meet in a small CAF on the edge of Riverton, a neutral place, away from the tension of home. I wasn't sure what to expect. Would they be the same parents who had kicked me out, or had time and regret softened their hearts? When I walked into the CAF, I saw them immediately. My mother, her eyes red-rimmed, her hair a little grayer than I remembered, sat at a table with my father. He looked older, 2 lines edged deeper into his face, his eyes tired, but they were both there, waiting for me. My heart hammered in my chest as I approached the table. We didn't speak right away. For a moment, the air between us was thick with the weight of years of silence. My father was the first to break it. "Emily," he said, his voice low and full of emotion. "I'm sorry. We were wrong. I don't know what we were thinking." His voice cracked, and for the first time in a long while, I saw my father not as the angry man who had thrown me out, but as someone who had been broken by his own actions. My mother reached for my hand, her grip shaking. "We hurt you," she whispered, "and we've regretted it every day since. I don't expect you to forgive us right away, but please know we are so sorry." Tears welled up in my eyes as I listened to them. The years of hurt, the feelings of abandonment, flooded back. I wanted to scream at them, to tell them everything I had gone through. But there was something else too, something that had been buried beneath the anger. It was forgiveness, not for them, not yet, but for me. "I don't know if I can forgive you," I said, my voice trembling, "but I am willing to try." We sat there for hours, talking. There were no grand apologies, no sweeping declarations of love. It was simple, raw, and painfully honest. They told me about the regret they'd lived with, about how their fears had led them to make decisions they would never have made if they'd known the truth. They admitted their mistakes, and I listened, and for the first time in months, I felt like I was starting to heal. I didn't know what the future held, whether things could ever go back to the way they were. But in that moment, I knew one thing for sure: this was the first step in mending what had been broken, and that, for now, was enough. As time passed, I began to rebuild my life in a way I never thought possible. With Grandma Margaret's unwavering support, I found the strength I needed to raise Leo. I took one step at a time, each day a small victory. And through it all, I learned that life doesn't always go according to plan, but that doesn't mean it's not worth living. As for my parents, things were never quite the same, but we found our way back to each other, one fragile step at a time. They never fully understood the depth of my pain, but they tried, and for that, I was grateful. I wasn't sure we would ever return to the family we once were, but the forgiveness I had found in my heart opened a door to something new, a chance at healing, at rediscovery. Leo grew stronger every day, his curiosity and his bright mind always pushing me forward, reminding me of the love and strength I had within. He was the light in my life, the joy I had never known I needed. Life had come full circle. The pain of the past was still there, woven into the fabric of who I was, but it no longer defined me. I had learned the hard way that life is a collection of moments, some beautiful, some painful, but all a part of the story that shapes us. And mine, I realized, was far from over. Thank you for watching. If you want to hear more life stories, make sure to subscribe to the channel and stay tuned for future videos. There's always something new to learn, and I'm glad you're here to join me on this journey.